Hey everyone, in this video we're going to be looking at the configuration tab in Betaflight. So let's get right into it. Okay, so once you plugged in your quad as usual, we're going to go all the way down to the configuration tab, which obviously isn't that much down, it's just the third tab, right under ports. So let's click on it, and over here, wow, there's a whole lot of things. There's a whole lot of things. A whole lot of switches, a whole lot of dials, many things. But in reality, not many of these things are necessary for you to be able to fly right away. A lot of these things that I already have checked because I already set up this quad are not necessary. These are just things that can help later on. But for necessary things you need to fly, not many things are very important in here. So let's just start right from the top over here in system configuration. So over here we've got the gyro update frequency and the PID loop frequency. So honestly, not too important. Over here you used to be able to change the gyro update frequency, but they changed this and now you cannot change it. It stays at 8 kilohertz. This depends on which flight controller you have, and it depends on the manufacturer as well, but most of the time it's going to be 8 kilohertz. Then for the PID loop frequency, you can change this. Most of the time it would be on 8 kilohertz, but you can also lower it. The only reason why you would want to lower it though is because let's say you have it on 8 kilohertz, but your CPU load is too high. And just to give you an idea, you want to usually keep your CPU load down here over here below 75%. If it's above 75% and you're at 8 kilohertz for the PID loop frequency, which is the same as the gyro update frequency, you might want to lower it, which is why I have it at 2 kilohertz. That was actually the default thing I had for this quad. But if you have it at 8 kilohertz by default and you realize that your CPU load is way too high, it's above 75% basically, you can lower it to 4 kilohertz or 2 kilohertz. Next, we've got accelerometer and barometer. I don't actually know why the barometer is there, because if you look at the top right, you can see I do not have a barometer over here. But I don't know why it's on, it was on by default. But basically what these switches are is you can either turn on or turn off the accelerometer, barometer, and magnometer. The magnometer is actually just a compass on your quad. Most of them do not have it, and also you would need to calibrate it in the setup tab over here, which is quite complicated because you need to be away from any magnets or metals, because it calibrates itself with the magnetic north. So if we go back to the config tab, if I turn off accelerometer, that basically means this only changes something for horizon mode and angle mode, the flight modes basically, because what the accelerometer does is it tells the flight controller which side is up, and angle mode and horizon mode, when you let go of your stick, it will center your quad back. But without the accelerometer, it won't know which side is up, so it won't exactly be able to center it back and bring it back to what it was before. In acro mode, it won't change anything because already you can flip, you have full control over your quad, so the accelerometer isn't exactly necessary because your quad will stay in whatever position you left it, even though you center your sticks again. But yeah, that's the accelerometer. The barometer, most quads will not have one. If you do have one, you can turn it on. It's just for the flight controller and the OSD, so you can see the level of everything. I don't know why it's on. I don't actually have one, but yeah. All right, magnometer, as I said this before, I do not have one. You can even check up here. I do not have a magnometer, which is why it's turned off, and also it's a little bit useless and complicated to set up. Anyways, the next box down here is personalization. So personalization, not necessary. Like I said, there aren't that many things in the configuration tab that is necessary to fly, but I still want to explain it because it could be useful for when you're saving backups and loading them. So basically you can choose a craft name and a pilot name. Right now I'm using Betaflight 4.4. I used to use Betaflight 4.3, and in there you only had the craft name. So now they added the pilot name. This doesn't really change anything you're flying. It's only when you save a backup, what it's going to do, it's going to add the craft name and or the pilot name into the name of the file. So if you ever have to load the backup, it's going to be easier to find the backup if they're all mixed up with a bunch of other quads, because you'll have the name of your quad and the name of the pilot. So that's all personalization is just giving a name to your files, basically. But yeah, all right, camera angle, well, the FPV camera angle in degrees, I'm not going to talk about it because this is a complicated thing, and it's also very unnecessary if you're if you're not too serious about like how your camera angle feels, or the camera up tilt at least. So we're going to skip that for now. Next one is arming. So over here we only have the maximum arm angle in degrees. Basically it's set up by default at 25 degrees on pretty much every quad. What this does is your quad will only arm if your quad is placed in a position that is below 25 degrees. If your quad is in a position that is above 25 degrees, it will not let you arm it. This was mostly because, let's say you're working with your quad and it's closer to you, and you accidentally flip the arm switch and you're holding it, you don't want it the propellers to spin and end up cutting you, which is why they added an arm angle. Honestly, you don't really need to touch it. 25 degrees is perfectly fine. All right, so other features. This is just a whole other section that it even says other features. They're not necessary for your flight. You can look at them, you can do some more research on them. They're not necessary, which is why I'm going to be skipping them. Like I said at the start, this is a tutorial for how to get in the air as quickly as possible. Anyways, then there's the GPS. I don't have one. If you don't have one, there's no point in using it. So we're leaving it. Next thing is board and sensor alignment. So the board and sensor alignment goes back to when you calibrate the accelerometer, because sometimes when you calibrate the accelerometer, sometimes either your desk won't be straight or your quad just won't be leveled, which will cause the accelerometer to not necessarily be perfectly accurate with the default position for where up is, basically. So if that's a problem, and when you're flying, let's say you're just trying to hover, your quad always ends up drifting to one side, you can use the roll degrees, pitch degrees, and yaw degrees to fix that, so it ends up being straight again, and does not when you're hovering, it does not drift to the left or the right, front or back. Over here, you also have the gyro acceleration and first gyro. Gyro and acceleration, basically over here, some quads might have more than just one gyroscope or accelerometer. You can choose to have the first one, the second one, or both of them. On this quad, I only have one, so that's what most flight controllers are actually only going to have one of these. So if you click over here, you only have first. Over here, the first gyro, this tells you the orientation of your flight controller. I'd say just leave it at what it is in default, because if this is quite complicated to understand, because it depends on how you oriented your flight controller when you were either building your drone, and you need one of the things is that there's an arrow on the flight controller. So if the arrow is pointing forward, so basically where your camera would be, you would need a certain amount of degrees. So if my number by default was clockwise 270, so just leave it like that. If you have 180 degrees, keep it like that, because it could mess something up. And if you want to figure some, this is mostly for just if you're building your drone. My quad was already pre-built, so I did not have to mess around with this. If you built it, just most of the time the flight controller will already have it by default, like I said. But if you flipped the flight controller so the arrow wasn't pointing forward anymore, you might have to figure something out for this. Or just simply use the roll and yaw degrees in the board and sensor alignment section. That also works because it just basically tells the flight controller just flip everything around for a certain amount of degrees. Anyways, don't touch this. It's not necessary either. If to be able to fly, this is really only if you've got a problem with something or if you're trying to get more into it. So yeah, don't touch too much the board and sensor alignment unless you really need to. Next one is accelerometer trim. So this same thing, accelerometer tells you which side is up. This is to trim it. Honestly, don't touch it either. I have not touched it yet. It's not very necessary. But if there was a problem when you calibrated it, kind of like in board and sensor alignment, this you can trim the accelerometer so that it's more accurate. But otherwise, don't touch it. Now, D-shot beacon and configuration. So some drones don't actually have beepers. Smaller drones don't necessarily have beepers. If you built a drone, maybe you didn't have a beeper when you built it. It's possible. So if you do have a beeper, if you have a beeper, actually, it should be fine. But if you don't have a beeper, what you can do is to make the motors beep instead. So you know when you plug a battery into your quad, then there's the beeping sound when it turns on and then when it connects. That's not the beeper, that's the motors that are making that noise. So you can choose beacon tones. This is not necessarily very important. This actually the rest of this side over here is only about the beeper. If you don't necessarily need the beeper, this is not important. But yeah, so over here you've got RX lost and RX set. By default I had RX lost, that was already set up, so you can copy what I have too, that's fine. Over here beeps when TX is turned off or signal lost. So this goes back to a failsafe as well if you lose your signal. TX is the transmitter, so if you lose the signal if your quad loses the signal with the transmitter, it will start beeping. So yeah, that's just what the beep is. Then in the beeper configuration, very last part, after this we're done the configuration tab, because I'm not going to be going into the other features. This is all about the beeper. I have them all on. You can look through them. It explains right over here what it does. You can choose which one you want to set up and everything. It's all up to you. And yeah, that's really all there is to the configuration tab. There's actually very little that is important. It's mostly accelerometer and the update frequency and loop frequency. Otherwise, most of this stuff isn't necessary to be able to fly. And a lot of it is actually just the beeper. So yeah, that was the configuration tab. Honestly, not too complicated. You don't really need to touch anything in here unless it's really because you want to do it. You would usually be able to just leave it all on default and you should be fine. Okay guys, this was the end of the video. This was the configuration tab. Not too complicated. It looks like there's a whole lot of things, but there really isn't. You can always go rewatch the video if you didn't understand something. I hope you learned something, and if you've got any questions, put them down in the comments. Like the video, subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next one.